I'm Dave Cross. This tutorial is brought to you by the National Association of Photoshop Professionals. You can find more about NAPP at photoshopuser.com and see why it's such a great idea to join this organization. You can also find more Photoshop tips and tricks and tutorials at our weekly free podcast, photoshopusertv.com. You can get it through that website or subscribe on iTunes. And as I mentioned, I'm Dave Cross. My blog is davecross.blogspot, just in case you're interested. What we're going to do in this particular tutorial is a very cool idea. It's a kind of an advanced technique maybe, but it's actually just a series of fairly straightforward steps. So as long as we follow the steps fairly closely, we can get a pretty cool effect, which is this. Take a portrait of someone, or just a regular photograph, and turn it into something that looks like this, where their portrait is actually made out of text, very small text, but this text is still editable. So if you want to change it up, as we'll see later, you can do that. So let's go ahead and get started to show you the steps involved in doing this. And again, this works with just about any portrait at all, as long as it's a fairly standard one. It doesn't have to have dramatic lighting or anything, although you could try that as well. So the first thing we need to do is go to the Select menu and choose Color Range. And I'm going to select the shadows. It will automatically select all the shadow parts of my document. I'm going to press Command J on the Macintosh, Control J on Windows to copy those pixels onto their own layer, as you can see here. Then I go back. I got to click back on the background layer to make it the active layer. And then once again, go back to Color Range, but this time from the pull-down menu, I'm going to choose Midtones. Again, these choices are already there for you. Just choose Midtones, click OK. It automatically makes a selection of that. And again, we press Command J on the Mac, Control J for Windows to put that on a layer by itself. So if I hide the background, we end up with two layers, the midtone layer and the shadow layer. Now, for the effect we want to do, we don't want them to be in color. We want them to be either a shade of gray or in black. So it's pretty easy to do that. You go to the Edit menu, choose Fill. And in here, we're going to change a couple of things. So this is our midtone layer we're doing. So if I get a little closer, you can see we're going to change this to 50% gray. And it's very important we have this checkbox that says Preserve Transparency. What that'll do is it'll make sure only the pixels on that layer will become colored. The rest will stay transparent or preserved. So I click OK, and you see now that whole layer, anything on it, is turned to gray. And we're going to do kind of the same thing with this top layer. So I click on the top layer, which remember was our shadow layer, and choose Edit, Fill. Keep everything the same except change this to black. Click OK, and then we get these two shades, black and gray. And just as an aside, as you can see, this could be a pretty interesting kind of a portrait look just by itself. It is still two separate layers. I want it to be one layer, so a simple way to do that is press Command or Control E to merge down. You can also find that from a pop-up menu in the Layers panel. So now we're going on to our next step. Now to make this a little easier to see, this is not a necessary step, but I like to do it because eventually I'm going to have this on a white background. So I want to add a new layer below this layer. So I'm going to hold down the Command or Control key, click on the New Layer button. I could also just add a new layer and drag it below. This just does it in one quick step because I like to use keyboard shortcuts. Now I want to fill that with white, so I notice that my foreground color is white. So I simply press Option Delete on the Mac, or on Windows it would be Alt Backspace. Again, I could also use the paint bucket or the fill command or whatever you like, so you end up with a white layer. Now I'm going to hide this for now. We're going to come back to it in a moment, but for right now I want to see the next step without it, so I've just hidden it. I'm going to take my Type tool. Instead of clicking once, which will create just one line of text, I'm going to start in the top corner and click and drag downwards to the opposite corner, kind of diagonally, which makes a big text block, which automatically makes the text wrap around from one line to another. Now, I didn't record this part, but what I did ahead of time was I went to something like, I think I went to Wikipedia, found whatever the article was on the front page, copied it, pasted it into my text editor, and then just pasted it a couple times and took out every carriage return, so I literally had a big block of text. And up here in the options bar, you can see that my size is pretty small. It's like 5 points. And that's, as you'll see, you can experiment with that. So now I take that text that I copied previously and I paste it. It's going to take a moment and then paste it, and now you can see it is text. It's a big, giant block of text. So then I commit that. I press the little button up in the corner to tell it I'm finished for now with my type, although I can always go back. So now I need to get the effect I want. So how I do that by going back to this layer, which was the black and gray version. By the way, this is my buddy Corey Barker. I should have mentioned that before, but he's letting me use this photo for this technique. And then we simply select all and copy this. And once we've done that, we can again hide this because it's served its purpose. Then we go back to our type layer. We're going to come down here at the bottom where we can add a layer mask, and we click on that and we get this thing called a layer mask. Now here's the most important part of this technique, which usually throws people off. At this point, if you're tempted to simply paste, it won't work because it'll just make a new layer. What we need to do is tell Photoshop we're going to paste it on the layer mask itself. And the way we do that is you'll hold down the Option key on the Mac, Alt for Windows, and click on the layer mask. And look over here, our display, you'll see now I'm actually looking at the mask itself. So now, when I choose Paste, it will paste it onto the mask. So you can see right there, it's pasted onto the mask. Now I can deselect it. And the whole idea of a layer mask is this. Black is going to hide our layer, white is going to show it. So because it's a type layer, when I click on the type layer, see, it's actually kind of the opposite of what I want. I don't want the text to be hidden here and shown here. I want the opposite. So we look back at our mask. The problem is the mask is kind of the wrong way round. So even it's going to look odd as a mask, it's going to give us the effect we want on the layer. I need to invert the mask to make it the opposite. Command or Control I will invert the mask to give us this black and gray idea kind of in a negative. But look what happens when I click on the type layer. There's our very cool portrait effect. You can still see who it is. You can see that it's text as well. Now here's what's really cool about this. Besides just the fact that this is pretty cool itself, I think just the way it looks, this is still text. So if I go in here and choose Select All, now it's a little hard to see. So at this point I would press Command or Control H, which is a shortcut for hide. So that means the text is still selected, but I can't see it. So now I could go in here, for example, and type 10 points up in the options bar, and you'll see now the text becomes a little more obvious. You can kind of see some words here and there. You could even go higher. Let's see what happens if we try 20 points. Now we've got a whole jumble of text, which is creating a whole different effect. Now, personally, I think it looks best with small type like 4 or 5 points, but you can see the point of this is experimentation because this is still a live type layer. So as we saw, it took a few steps, but as long as you follow them fairly closely and make sure, and the key is that whole idea of pasting onto the mask, you have to make sure you're viewing the mask, and what that lets you do is go from portrait to text-based portrait pretty easily. As I mentioned, this tutorial is brought to you by NAPP, the National Association of Photoshop Professionals. I'm Dave Cross, one of the instructors at NAPP, and my job is to teach people how to use Photoshop and do some pretty cool things. So check out photoshopusertv.com to see our weekly show. Take a look at my blog and take a look at NAPP if you would. I'm Dave Cross once again. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial.